They didn't know who the rookie ICU nurse really was, until the day a classified unit stormed the corridor, boots striking tile in perfect rhythm, and a lieutenant colonel with combat ribbons across his chest stopped in front of her bed space, came to rigid attention, and addressed her by a call sign that was not printed anywhere on her badge. But that moment, when the entire intensive care unit at San Antonio Military Medical Center went silent, and Dr. Victor Halstead's incident report slipped halfway from his fingers, was still weeks away on the morning Elena Ward first walked into the unit as its newest hire, a nurse with a plain resume, a state school degree, and the faint, pale scar that curved along her right forearm like a memory she no longer explained. The ICU sat on the third floor, past double security doors and beneath fluorescent lights that hummed faintly when the hallways were quiet, and Elena learned its sound before she learned its people. Ventilators exhaling in mechanical rhythm, infusion pumps clicking through programmed doses, telemetry monitors chirping irregular alarms that meant everything and nothing depending on who was listening. She arrived each day at 5:45, 15 minutes before her shift officially began, and no one commented on the habit except to assume she was anxious, new, eager to prove herself. What they did not see was the way her eyes moved once, only once, across every entrance, every crash cart location, every oxygen manifold and blind corner, before she set down her bag and poured her coffee black. It was not nervousness. It was inventory. Dr. Halstead noticed her for different reasons. A retired Army colonel turned ICU director. He carried authority like a second spine and regarded hierarchy as a form of oxygen. Elena, with her soft voice and lack of visible distinction, did not register as someone who belonged in his carefully structured ecosystem. Observe first, he told her on her third day, in front of two residents who pretended to focus on their tablets. Intervention comes with experience. She had nodded, because she understood experience better than most people in that room. But she did not explain that understanding. She did not explain that she had once triaged casualties in a dust-choked courtyard outside Alisaka, with rotor wash tearing at her sleeves, and a wounded operator bleeding out beneath her hands while rounds cracked against concrete 20 yards away. None of that existed here. Here, she was Elena Ward, RN, new hire, probationary period. The staff assessed her the way hospital staffs do, quickly, quietly, by watching what someone does at 3 o'clock when a vent alarm sounds and the attending is nowhere in sight. Elena moved with economical precision. She did not rush, but she did not hesitate. When a patient's pressure drifted downward in increments too subtle for a new nurse to notice, she noticed. When a resident reached for the wrong infusion titration, she corrected it gently, framing it as a question so no one felt challenged. "Are you sure you want to increase that before checking the latest labs?" she would say, and the lab would reveal what she already knew. It unsettled people. Competence without visible origin often does. Dr. Halstead began redirecting her assignments. Family updates instead of critical admits, stable post-ops instead of complex trauma transfers. And each time she accepted the change without visible reaction, though she cataloged the pattern the way she cataloged exits. The other nurses were cordial but cautious. ICU culture is built on earned trust, and Elena did not volunteer stories that might have accelerated the process. When asked why she chose military medicine, she said only, it felt like it mattered, and returned to charting. They assumed she meant patriotic service or loan forgiveness programs. They did not imagine convoy medevacs under red light conditions or the weight of a combat medic's bag when you know you will have to decide who receives your last unit of blood. 8 weeks into her employment, a respiratory therapist named Mark watched her manage a sudden desaturation on a septic patient with a calm that bordered on eerie. She repositioned the patient, adjusted PEEP settings within protocol, anticipated the need for suction before the resident voiced it, and restored oxygenation in under 3 minutes. "You've done this before," Mark said afterward, half joking. She met his eyes briefly. "Everyone here has," she replied, which was true in one narrow sense and profoundly untrue in another. Dr. Halstead's skepticism sharpened the more often she proved correct. He mistook her quiet for ambition concealed, and ambition in someone he had not mentored felt like defiance. "Credentials matter," he said during a staff meeting when discussing continuing education pathways, glancing in her direction without naming her. "We cannot substitute instinct for formal training. Elena wrote the phrase down on a scrap of paper and folded it once before sliding it into her pocket, not because she disagreed, but because she recognized the irony. Instinct, in her experience, was rarely instinct at all, but accumulated data stored in muscle memory from scenarios where hesitation cost lives. Outside the hospital, she rented a small apartment 15 minutes away and kept her life spare. No photographs on the walls, no social media presence beyond what employment required, no lingering connections that might draw questions. She ran before dawn on weekends along the perimeter trail near the base, measuring distance by breath and heartbeat rather than miles. And when helicopters passed overhead, she did not look up. Inside the ICU, she became the nurse who volunteered for night shifts others avoided, the one who stayed late to ensure handoffs were thorough, the one who corrected documentation errors quietly instead of reporting them. Yet there were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, when something older surfaced. The way her shoulders squared when security conducted an unannounced drill, the way she positioned herself slightly between the most critical patient and the door when unfamiliar contractors entered the unit, the way her gaze sharpened at the first distant echo of boots in the hallway. No one interpreted these signals correctly. They saw diligence, perhaps mild hypervigilance common among hospital staff. They did not see pattern recognition forged under fire. And so the days passed in orderly routine until the morning the call came from a training site west of Camp Bullis, reporting an explosion during a classified exercise with multiple critical injuries inbound. The unit shifted into mass casualty readiness, and Dr. Halstead began issuing directives with crisp authority, assigning Elena to family liaison once more, out of the center, out of the bays where real decisions would be made. She accepted the instruction with the same neutral nod she had perfected, but as she moved toward the hallway, she felt the old calibration settle into place, the quiet alignment of breath and focus that precedes impact. And somewhere deep in the muscle memory of her hands was the knowledge that what was about to come through those doors would not resemble textbook trauma. It would resemble a battlefield. And the ICU was about to learn that their rookie nurse had already survived one. The ICU shifted from routine to rupture in less than 10 minutes. And by the time the first stretcher burst through the secure doors from the training grounds near Camp Bullis, Elena Ward already knew this would not be textbook trauma. It would be battlefield medicine transported indoors. Dr. Victor Halstead was issuing orders in clipped succession. Bay 1 and 2 are mine. Residents rotate. Ward, documentation and family coordination. Stay clear of procedures. She nodded once and stepped aside, but her eyes stayed fixed on the incoming patient. Cyanotic. Distended neck veins. One side of the chest barely rising. He's tensioning, she said evenly. The resident preparing the needle hesitated just long enough to matter. Second intercostal space. Straight in. The insertion drifted off angle. Elena moved without raising her voice, guiding his hand with precise correction. The needle seated properly. Air escaped in a violent hiss. Oxygen saturation climbed. No one commented. There wasn't time. The second operator came in with a hi-fi tourniquet and blood still pushing past it in steady pulses. Elena saw the placement immediately. That won't control it. Junctional bleed. She was already reaching for combat gauze. Direct pelvic pressure. That's not standard ICU protocol, someone muttered. It is for blast injuries, she replied calmly, packing the wound with firm, practiced movements and leaning her weight into the compression point that mattered. The bleeding slowed, enough to buy surgical time. The room found a brutal rhythm. Ventilators engaging, lines placed, radiology called, blood products rushing in. Elena moved where needed without waiting to be invited, adjusting positioning, anticipating supplies, correcting subtle errors before they compounded. She functioned like someone who had done this with fewer resources and higher stakes. Then the hallway changed. Heavy, synchronized footfalls approached with unmistakable precision. 4 men in civilian tactical attire entered, scanning automatically. At their center walked a lieutenant colonel whose bearing carried the unmistakable gravity of Delta Force. He bypassed Dr. Halstead entirely and stopped in front of Elena. The ICU went still. Then he snapped to attention. The others followed instantly. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Didn't know you were stateside." The name he used next was not Elena. It was a call sign. Hawk. Across the bay, one of the wounded operators forced his eyes open. "Hawk," he rasped through the oxygen mask. Dr. Halstead stepped forward, composure thinning. Lieutenant Colonel, I'm Dr. Halstead, ICU Director. I'm aware, Doctor. The Colonel replied politely, never breaking eye contact with Elena. Staff Sergeant Elena Ward. Special Operations Medic. Northern Syria. She pulled 3 of my operators out of a convoy strike. Silence settled heavily over the unit. Elena removed her gloves slowly, hands steady. 2 need immediate or, she said, nodding toward the junctional bleed patient. It was neither confirmation nor denial, just focus. The Colonel's expression shifted to something close to relief. Understood. Dr. Halstead tried once more to regain footing. Advanced operational medical training wasn't disclosed in her file. Elena met his gaze evenly. My license is valid. My service record isn't classified. The Colonel's voice remained calm. 2 of my men are alive because of her decisions today. That was the only credential that mattered in that moment. The ICU resumed motion, but the atmosphere had shifted permanently. The rookie nurse they had sidelined was no longer undefined. She was a combat medic with years of experience measured in survival. And as surgical transport rolled one stabilized operator toward the elevator, the men who had snapped to attention remained nearby, not out of protocol, but out of respect for the medic they once knew as Hawk. By evening, the ICU had settled into the fragile quiet that follows survival. 2 operators were out of surgery and stable. 3 more were breathing on their own. The last remained sedated but no longer crashing. Monitors hummed. Ventilators cycled. The crisis had passed, but the atmosphere had changed. Elena stood at the nurse's station finishing her charting, each entry clinical, detached, exact. Across from her, Dr. Victor Halstead held the unfinished incident report he had started that morning. He read it once, then slowly folded it in half and set it aside without signing. The lieutenant colonel from Delta Force returned after surgery confirmed positive outcomes. He approached Elena without ceremony this time. They're going to be fine, he said quietly. She nodded. They did what they were trained to do, she replied. He studied her for a moment. We have an advisory billet opening. Special Operations Medical Training. Stateside. You'd shape the next generation. It wasn't pressure. It was recognition. Elena glanced through the ICU glass at the young resident she had corrected that morning. He was now reviewing decompression techniques with intense focus, ego replaced by humility. She looked at the nurses who had watched her pack a junctional bleed and now regarded her with unmistakable respect. I'll think about it, she said. The colonel inclined his head once and left without another word. A few minutes later, Dr. Halstead called a brief staff huddle. The team gathered, uncertain. He stood straighter than usual, but the edge in his voice was gone. This morning, he began, several lives were saved because of decisive action. His eyes met Elena's openly. I made assumptions about experience based on what I could see on paper. That was a mistake. The ICU went still. Experience, he added carefully, doesn't always advertise itself. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Elena gave a small nod. We all responded, she said simply. It was enough. When the meeting broke, work resumed. No one reassigned her to peripheral tasks. No one questioned her presence in critical spaces. When a patient's pressure dipped unexpectedly an hour later, 2 residents instinctively looked to her first. She adjusted fluids, reassessed, stabilized the situation in under a minute. No hesitation, no commentary, just competence. Before transport, one of the recovering operators caught her attention from his bed. Hawk, he said quietly. She paused. You kept us alive before, he added. You did it again. Her expression softened just slightly. You kept your cells alive long enough to get here, she replied. That matters. When her shift ended, she walked the corridor alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. The exits were where they had always been. For months, she had chosen invisibility, believing it was safer that way. But what the day had shown her was something steadier. She didn't have to shrink to survive. She could be Elena Ward, RN, and the medic they once called Hawk at the same time. The next morning, she arrived at 5:45 as usual. Coffee poured, charts reviewed. The young resident approached with a notebook in hand. Can you show me the junctional technique again? He asked. Elena motioned toward the skills lab. Bring gloves, she said, and learn to listen with your hands. Across the unit, Dr. Halstead watched briefly, then returned to his office without interrupting. And inside the ICU at San Antonio Military Medical Center, The rookie nurse no one had taken seriously moved steadily through her shift.